Hi, I'm Theo, and these broadcasts are to support the blogs on nomoreshee.com's website as well as the online classes. In this episode, Multivalence in Prophecy, in part 8 of our series on prophecy. Welcome back to the No More She broadcast as we continue in part 8 in our series on prophecy, and we talk about how that even when we look at the predictive nature of prophecy, that is often considered the most important part of prophecy, there's still multiple ways of looking at it, and there's reasons why different traditions, even within the Christian faith, approach it differently, and they have their basic understandings. And so we just want to kind of work out a little bit of this as we approach a better understanding and hopefully better readings of the text. And so I'm asking, is this whole idea of prophecy and this whole idea of manifold beauty as a book, that's out there on the various readings of Genesis. How can you read Genesis chapter 1? There's so many different ways to read Genesis chapter 1. And so many different people that read it so many different ways. And is there one correct way? No. Because one way just doesn't cut the mustard, because one way of reading the text alone, you could be wrong. Even scholars can admit that they're so focused on, digging out, as I said in the previous episode, the marrow of the bone in one sense that they might miss something else because they're blind to it. And so it takes, to listen to all, and we can have a favorite singer. We can have a favorite sports team. We can have a favorite sport. And we can miss out on something else going on in the world. We can have blind spots. We can not see something because we're so honed in on our favorite. And I was recently a part of a podcast, and this idea that you begin mapping and tracking ideas across disciplines, not only of biblical studies or Bible or religion, but itself as this religion. But when you look at all the ancient Near East or the ancient world, all of antiquity, and trying to map out something like the flood, or something else, where you have the same idea across so many different cultures speaking about it. And this was not the flood, but I'm just using that to give you an idea. And then they thought that this would fit, and they asked this expert, can we say the same thing about your field? And it happened to be an Egyptologist, and the Egyptologist said no. Now, that's just one Egyptologist saying no, that's not the case for in the Egypt system of thinking. Now that could be that Egyptologist is wrong, but more than likely he is correct because he has studied it. And it just, something they were tracking on so many other levels did not end up turning out for at least that Egyptologist to resonate with anything that he had understood. Maybe that's just because Egyptians didn't think that way necessarily. So, there's not this magic or silver bullet that's thread through all of time that fits, and we can string everything together so wonderfully all the time. There's just diversity, and different people groups think differently. And you're not going to be able to process it all and bring it together. What Italians do with their food and the Chinese do with their food and the Latinos or Mexicans or however you want to say it do with their food, and, it's just all different. And you're not necessarily going to get those same strands all the time, necessarily. It is interesting to see the culinary arts across time and across geography and what different people groups over different time periods have done with food. And the same thing with the idea of religion and text. and to limit ourselves to it's only this way. It reminds me of children. My mother cooks food this way, or my father cooks it that way. Who's right? My mother said this, well, my father said that. And children in the playground fighting over my mother or my father or my uncle or whatever said this. And we're still doing that with the virus, with the pandemic, anti-vax, pro-vax, anti-choice, pro-choice, anti-this, pro-that. We're still doing that. And who ultimately has it perfect and right from all perspectives, in all senses, in all cases? And what ultimately must we reside with? And when you get down to something like ethics, and what is an ethical decision, what could be right for one situation may not be the exact solution in another. And we try our hardest to do that and make things into a black and white, that this is always white and always right, and this is always black and this is always wrong or evil, and this reading is always supreme against all other readings. And I think that we miss things. And so I wanted to address some of this as we're ciphering through this whole idea of prophecy. There's so many different perspectives out there, and they all have their advantages, and they all have ways of looking at the text that are remarkable, and I can resonate with what they're saying. But then when applied somewhere else, they all have their weaknesses, and they all have places where I cannot resonate, or I just don't seem to come to that place. And I don't choose to join one single camp at the exclusion of all others. And I see that on this channel when people talk about that, this is, this is it. This is the way, my view alone, and you're wrong. And I'm not trying to promote a single viewpoint on this broadcast, on these broadcasts, on this channel. I'm just trying to be able to open up the world and say, can somebody else's perspective enhance my own? And can someone else's perspective I disagree with, because I just cannot see it, or at least I cannot see it exclusively the way you see it. And I don't hold an exclusive view that this is the only way to read something. I want to be open to allow for other ideas to hopefully help enhance my own thinking, so that I will be able to have a better reading, considering all options, rather than just forever doing the cancel culture thing and removing options off the table and never considering them, and it becoming a blind spot for me, and not able to really truly understand why someone else would resonate with that viewpoint. That's very difficult for me now. And so at the very outset of this channel, if you listen to my introduction, that's the journey I'm on. And this is what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to understand why you believe what you believe and why it resonates so much with you, so that I can understand you and I can add the things that you see to my viewpoint, and hopefully it helps me see things better. But I cannot do that to the exclusion of someone else necessarily, without viable data points to let me know that. And so I don't read Isaiah 24, 25, 26, 27 as predictive prophecy of September 11th, 2001 in New York, because New York is west of Isaiah, not east. So I've tried to mature, and I don't read Revelation 9 as a locust plague that took place in the year 2020. I just don't see Ezekiel 38 and 39 pointing to Soviet-era submarines, blasting the land of Egypt with nuclear weapons. I just don't see those as viable. I don't see John's locust in the book of Revelation referring to Apache military helicopters. I'm not sure that the idea of the rapture is the best reading of the text. There are parts of dispensationalism that I really like, and there are parts that I really don't. There are parts of preterism that I like. There are parts that I don't. Am I going to read the scriptures to the exclusion of other viewpoints? No. Where everything that John is talking about merely happened, and there is nothing left for the text to do except to hopefully guide us to do something better. Am I going to read it that way to the point that Jesus is never coming back? At this point, no. I'm not going to read it like that. I don't have reason to think that that's what the text was doing and that Jesus already came back in AD 70 or sometime a bit later in the first century. And that's it. And that's what the text always intended. I'm not going to read it like that. But I do find valuable things that those people who hold all of those views I just described to you in the last minute or two, they're going to bring out points of the text that I did not see before. And I'm going to enjoy those parts of the viewpoints, but then I find weaknesses in other parts of their viewpoints. And so I'm going to enjoy some of what they say. At the same time, I'm going to not hold to others. And I just feel like that's a better way for me to maturely help my understanding of the biblical text rather than going the route of higher criticism and just saying, I look out my window and I just don't see the world the way that the biblical authors see it. And I go, amen, that's right. Because they didn't live in your world. And much of what you have in your viewpoint has come as a result of generation after generation and century after century of people who have gone before you and laid the foundation to your thinking. And then just to take a magic eraser and erase all of it doesn't make sense to me. That is the best way to read the text and just entirely to discredit it. I just don't see that either. So anyway, is prophecy merely predictive? Or is it totally non-predictive, as in cessationism, as in preterism, as in everything has already happened and there is no more to be said or done? I don't want to go either route. I don't feel as if there are people today that can rightly say, I'm an apostle, to the point that I am equal to the apostles of the first century. And the revelation that I received from God is either equal to or even supreme to what was being done in the first century. I can't go that route either. So, are there prophets today? Are there apostles today? Is there prophecy today? To what extent is there prophecy today? To what extent are these offices existing today? Or did that all conclude when the last person who had hands laid on them of one of the original first century apostles and prophets, to the last person that they breathed their last and they, went on to glory, does that mean that that's over with? That's the question. And some people follow one extreme or the other. And there are those who believe that they are prophets or apostles today, and that what they have to say is supreme to what the biblical text. There are people that have other texts. We mentioned the Mormons. We mentioned Jehovah's Witness. We mentioned Islam. Islam has received new revelation in the Quran that for them supersedes the biblical text. We have Mormons who believe, again, that God sent another one who spoke. And there are other texts. They have 5 texts. They don't have the Quran. They have 5 texts. And in the middle is the Bible, but they have 2 that are supreme over the Bible and 2 that come after the Bible in their understanding. And we have Jehovah's Witnesses who have their own translation of the biblical text. And obviously they have come down like Marcionites of the early church era that hold to their translation and their understanding of the New Testament, and they have their God, that Jehovah, which interestingly, that word is rather an impossibility according to Hebrew grammar, but it cannot be 3 syllables. But hey, that's just, in their understanding of the Hebrew. They don't even, they're not even close. The word Jehovah is just a tortured, a torturing of the Hebrew grammar, and it's wrong. And so it cannot be that. And no amount of modern scholarship can point that out to them because, again, they're led by some spirit that makes their revelation of the text supreme. And I don't agree with those things. I don't hold to that. I think that they're wrong, and I just think they have poor readings of the text. And I cannot agree myself or align myself with those particular readings. I just think that certain aspects of what they believe or hold just are poor readings of the text, and I don't adhere to those. At the same time, we must realize that we have this dynamic between the Hebrew Bible and what we call the New Testament. And so, the Hebrew people and the Jewish tradition that came out of the first century, being after the temple's destruction and rabbinic Judaism, they have their main text that ends, with the original Hebrew Bible, and that's it. And then they have all their supporting texts that they use to help people to understand, that has the rabbis and different interpretations to help people to gauge what's being said. But they finish at the Hebrew Bible, and Christianity is another outtake or outcome from the first century. And it's at this point that Christians, they have a whole section added to the Bible. And if you go through our canon series, you'll see where different traditions within Christianity have chosen different texts to add to the Bible. And so it's not just an easy black and white, nice and neat thing that we can do here. Otherwise, the Jews who just have their books that we can number at, they have various numberings of that we talk about in the canon, but they have their corpus and that body alone, and they restrict it just to that. Whereas certain aspects of Christianity have added different varying amounts to that number. And if you watch your canon series, you'll see the different groups and what they add. And so it's amazing. And if you go back to the Samaritans, they only have their Pentateuch plus, portions of Joshua maybe, and that's all they have. And so you can, again, along this spectrum, you can travel as far back as you want to be as minimalistic as you want, or you can be as maximalist as you want and add authority. And at what point does this idea of God's revelation, in the sense that we understand our Bibles, at what point do we cut it off and say that's it? And how do we address those things? And with all the abuses in place that have happened, how do we rightly allow for God's revelation to be what it is and add certain things that we feel need to be added, while at the same time realizing that there are places where we have to cut that off and we cannot continue to add. So does God speak today? And that's a big question that has to be wrestled with. And so I find it fascinating that there are people who critique the likes of Dr. Heiser or scholars and, turning to academia to help us better understand the text. And yet at the same time, there are people that have the same philosophy that have created these monstrosities that we have today in the, ways that people have read and understood the text differently. And out of that has come Apache helicopters, the rapture, the Book of Mormon, all Jehovah's Witness, because they were led by the Spirit. And I can understand why people would cling to cessationism and cling to prophecy either being what it is or what it isn't. It's no more. I can understand the reservations people have because the abuses that have taken place. That some people have, done, and the idea that ecstatic languages exist and for other religions, and that's scary. And just because someone abuses something, it's just because people abuse money, does that mean that we should end money? That there should be no money? One person posted that I went to school with that the love of money is the root of all evil, and they misunderstood the point, that what Paul was saying, that it's not money is the root of all evil, it's the love of it. And that's what Paul was getting at. And so, I tried to let them know, hey, I've been studying the Bible for a long time, and you got it wrong. Money is not the root of all evil. It's the love of it. It's a tool that's used. And if it's used in the right hands in the right way, then it can do great things. And if it's used wrongly, it can do bad things. But that doesn't make it bad. Maybe had we the love of God as God always intended, and we loved each other, we could come up with a system that was much better than the current systems we have and the current economic systems we have today. Yes, I can agree with that. Maybe we could do away with money like Gene Roddenberry, somehow tried to exemplify in his Star Trek that in the future there is no debt, in the future there are no poor people. That'd be wonderful if we could come out with a system where that is true. But, it seems like I'm not the ultimate Trekkie, but it seems like there was something going on in later episodes with later shows called like Deep Space Nine where they had credits. So I don't know. There was some kind of way of doing transactions. So that did exist somehow in the 24th century. So it didn't pan out. They were still killing each other. There were still wars. There was still need to have military stations and technology built to protect people. So, a lot of that stuff didn't go away. So that was still required. So there's something there to that. But the idea is, again, it's wonderful to see different people with different viewpoints and to enjoy each one's viewpoint for what it is, and to take away from each viewpoint the strengths and also the weaknesses. Thank you very much, and God bless you for listening. Stay tuned for more episodes and videos to help you with your journey from nomorec.com.